Hello and welcome to the U.S. Central Asia Forum, hosted by the Eurasia Center here at the Atlantic Council. My name is Andrew Denieri. I'm an Associate Director here at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, all of you here in person in D.C. at the Atlantic Council, and all of you, of course, joining us online around the world. We're going to kick things off in just a minute here with some brief remarks from Senator Steve Daines, who's probably the most active American elected official on Central Asia and a really strong voice for U.S. policy and advancing ties in the region. But I first wanted to say a few words about why we're here, why we're doing this half-day conference. If you know the Eurasia Center, you know we're the place to come for events and analysis on Ukraine and Russia. Now, we've produced lots of reports and done lots of events on Central Asia in the nearly 5 years that I've been here as well. And we feel that now is an opportune time to do more on the region. With changing conceptions of how the United States engages with the world and how the Central Asian states see themselves and their partners, my Eurasia Center colleagues and I sensed that this was a moment to help better understand and shape what could be a new dawn of collaboration in the region. I was just in Astana last week at the Astana International Forum, which was a fascinating convening of heads of state, experts, business leaders on how to navigate this changing, shifting global future. Talking with folks and listening to the discussions, it was unmistakable that many countries, businesses, and organizations, and not only those in Central Asia, are revising how they see the world and how they pursue their interests. Under the leadership of the Trump administration, the United States is grappling with the most dramatic shifts in our foreign policy in a generation. To be sure, this has created major uncertainty in many regions of the world. But in Central Asia, a sharper U.S. focus on business and supply chain security, among other things, could yield as yet untapped opportunities. Economic activity is ramping up in the region too. The World Bank projects real GDP growth in Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan between 5% and 7% in 2025. Turkmenistan a little lower, 2.3% for those wondering. And Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan in particular have shown a willingness to act more independently and confidently on the world stage than ever before. So today we're going to discuss where these new approaches meet. The aim of the forum is to interrogate how the United States and the Central Asian states can leverage strategic objectives to make real, tangible progress that increases prosperity and security and protects fundamental shared values. This will be something of a two-act play today. Following Senator Daines' remarks, I'll first moderate a discussion on critical raw materials and rare earths development in the region. And then I'll hand things off after the intermission to Ambassador Daniel Rosenblum, who, as a former U.S. ambassador to both Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, is well placed to lead a conversation on U.S. policy toward a more dynamic Central Asia. Now, the Central Asia community in D.C. I know isn't necessarily a huge one, but I know I see some new faces in the crowd, so welcome. Thank you for being with us. In the coffee break later this morning and in the closing lunch, I encourage you all to meet each other, network. We've designed this specifically to be substantively relevant, but with space to chat, catch up, and hopefully begin to put some of these discussions here today into action. Now, that's quite enough for me, but before we get the show on the road, I want to first thank our partners, Foley Hoag LLP and Mr. Miras Gianbayev. Truly, thank you so much for your support in making this all happen. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce the Honorable Senator Steve Daines, U.S. Senator for Montana, to deliver our keynote address. Thank you all for being here today.
Senator Steve Daines here, and thank you for inviting me to say a few words at the U.S. Central Asia Forum. As a member of the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee, one of my top priorities is making sure we're advocating the best interests of the United States abroad. Central Asia is a region of untapped potential that has the opportunity to highlight the importance and impact of U.S. engagement and investment. I have visited all 5 of the Central Asia countries in the last 18 months. And in fact, this past week, I visited Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Georgia as well. I was the first U.S. Senator to visit Turkmenistan and Tajikistan in 13 years. Every place I traveled, I was met with an enthusiasm and desire for increased relationship with the United States. Critical minerals, manufacturing, agriculture, and energy are all economic sectors that could mature with U.S. collaboration, especially if the hindrance of Jackson Vanik is permanently removed. I want you all to know that here in D.C., I'm working closely with President Trump, Secretary of State Rubio, and my colleagues in Congress to ensure that we're promoting and protecting American interests and advancing peace through strength. So thank you all for bringing your expertise to the table as we navigate these complex issues. I look forward to hearing all the ideas that come out of this forum. If there's ever anything I can do, please don't hesitate to reach out.
All right, a huge thank you to Senator Daines for framing our two discussions here at the U.S. Central Asia Forum. Welcome, everyone, to panel number one. This is Powering Tomorrow Today, How to Maximize Central Asia's Critical Minerals Potential. We're excited to have 5 top experts with us to examine critical minerals and rare earth development in the region. In alphabetical order today, we have Mr. Alisher Akhmedov, Deputy Chief of Mission at the Embassy of Uzbekistan in the United States, His Excellency Yerzhan Ashikbayev, Ambassador of the Republic of Kazakhstan in the U.S., my colleague Reed Blakemore, Director of Research and Programs at the Global Energy Center at the Atlantic Council, Joe Klingler, Partner of International Litigation and Arbitration at Foley Hoag LLP, and of course Ambassador Jeffrey Pyatt, Distinguished Fellow at the Atlantic Council's Global Energy Center. So here's how we're going to spend our hour. We have 60 minutes for a moderated discussion and audience Q&A. For the Q&A, you can submit your questions by video, voice, and text at askac.org. That's askac.org. So get your questions in throughout our 40 minutes of discussion here, and in the last 20 minutes or so, I'll pitch those to our panelists. For those joining in person, we'll also have mics running around the audience, so you can feel free to raise your hand and ask your questions that way. All right, let's get started. Let's get into it. Ambassador Ashikbayev, first question to you. What are Kazakhstan's long-term goals for developing its critical minerals sector, and how do partnerships with countries like the United States fit into that vision?
Well, Andrew, first and foremost, very good morning to everyone, and I'm so delighted to see this full house sold out at this event. Thank you so much for coming, and it's really one of the biggest challenges of mine here in the US is to raise awareness, to educate, and the presence of so many distinguished experts, both traditional ones, but also so many new faces, so many young faces, is remarkable, and I'm grateful. And thank you, Andrew, for traveling all the way to Astana International Forum, and this has been, I believe, a pretty good new experience for you to get to know new angles to look at certain issues. So when it comes to Kazakhstan, as with so many resource-rich countries, we are longing to have tangible benefits from our mining sector for our economic prosperity. And we are not a newcomer in the big mining. Kazakhstan is a renowned producer of so many minerals. In fact, we do produce 20 out of 50 critical minerals. And in some of them, let's say uranium, Kazakhstan has a gargantuan share of the global production. It's 40%, not 1, 4, it's 40, and even more of that. So, and that list also includes 8 out of the 12 key minerals that US is entirely import dependent for. So, and unlike so many resource-rich countries, we offer developed midstream processing capabilities, strong infrastructure, low operating costs, investor-friendly relations, skilled workforce, stable political environment, as well as trusted and predictable strategic partnership relations with major global powers. Our goal is to attract investments that would help develop an integrated ecosystem that includes not only midstream processing capacities, but also power plants, transportation networks, railroads, and of course we are talking about investments into human capital development. So Kazakhstan's goal is overall is to become a key member of the international midstream group of countries and play its own role, an important role, in strengthening global supply chain resilience. So we are looking for a targeted financing, long-term offtake arrangements, including through DFC or EXIM, banks financing, and so on and so forth. So in fact, overall, what we would like to achieve is a comprehensive, full-fledged partnership with the US in this regard. So Kazakhstan is a full-fledged member of the Mineral Security Partnership. We are one of the main driving forces behind C5+1. That's initially Kazakh idea to launch that partnership with the US. And we are a strong supporter and active participants to critical minerals dialogue under the C5+1 framework. So, and although we see a strong interest and both from expert community and businesses alike, just a few weeks ago, we witnessed that interest in the form of when Department of Commerce hosted a webinar on critical minerals and mining opportunities in Kazakhstan. Over 100 American companies showed up. So that's by itself is a very strong interest. And by saying, I mentioned holistic approach, comprehensive. So we are not only offering some opportunities in the mining sector, but we want to think beyond American companies' participation in certain deposits, in the development of certain deposits. We are now in talks with major American mining schools to bring them to Kazakhstan and set up a new mining university so that our investor community would be relying on a skilled and trained workforce. So the US fits neatly into this vision, and Kazakhstan basically is a low-hanging fruit in this regard. But there are prejudices, I would say, and some legacy stereotypes, but also legislative issues that I hope this expert community will help us address. So first, I'm talking about overly narrow definition of what constitutes an ally, the definition of ally in the US legislation, especially in Inflation Reduction Act. So to qualify for EV tax credit, the country needs to have a free trade agreement with the US. But none of the Central Asian countries, to my knowledge, has one, so that disqualifies us immediately. And second, the FEOC provision, for those of you who are not familiar, foreign entities of concern provision, makes us, I would say, automatically hostages to our geography. Thirdly, Kazakhstan doesn't have permanent normal trade relations. And this is, I may sound not so diplomatic, but this is an outrageous. 30 years after the breakup of the Soviet Union, 10 years after Kazakhstan became WTO member nation, we are still, the US still discriminates, and this is the sanctions instrument. And believe me, no business would consider investing into a sanctioned entity. So you are rather, in terms of legislation, looking at us in a close kind of putting us closer to the countries, the pariah states, very much like North Korea or Iran, but with dozens of billions of US investments on the ground, with $4 billion in annual trade, This is something incompatible with the forward-looking vision. And finally, on top of that, we have 27% tariffs offered to Kazakh exports to complete the picture. So these are the overall landscape, but let me stress one important thing. The critical minerals competition is a zero-sum game. Let me stop here and, yeah.
Thanks very much for opening the discussion there, Han. And I think you'd get pretty strong agreement in this room that we need to end Jackson Vanik so we can get to that comprehensive strategic partnership that you talked about. But talking of partnerships, I want to go to you, Mr. Akhmedov. There was a large delegation from Uzbekistan visiting Washington back in April, led by the foreign minister, Mr. Saidov, in part to discuss critical raw materials development. What can you tell us about the US and Uzbekistan and how they're advancing in their CRM partnerships?
Thank you very much, Andrew. In fact, it's quite difficult to say, something new after Ambassador's excellent speech. But I would like just to start by saying thank you for organizing this event and saying that I'm very happy to be back in DC. I have the honor to serve here 2013, 2016. And coming back, I see how much dynamism is here, how much interest is here about Central Asia, and we greatly appreciate the Atlantic Council's role in bringing more vision, more clarity to one of the most developing regions of the world, which is Central Asia. Indeed, the visit of Minister Saidov to DC was quite successful. His Excellency had very good negotiations, meetings at the White House, at the State Department, with other stakeholders. And one of the, as you rightly mentioned, topics was, of course, our cooperation in critical raw materials. We see it as one of the main pillars of Uzbek-United States partnership. Along with trade, along with economic modernization, and we really striding to bring, to develop our partnership to a new qualitative, new level, the level of mutual trust and mutual support in this direction. In April 2014, Uzbekistan and the United States signed the MOU about critical raw materials cooperation. And now we are moving forward with the implementation of this document. Also, as Kazakhstan, we are also part of the Mineral Security Partnership. We discussed a bit before this event with Ambassador Payat about what we should do, and what we expect is right now there's some concrete proposals, initiatives from the United States, and we are ready, we are open for the joint implementation of them. We see this as a strategic alignment where Uzbekistan could bring its significant untapped reserves, while United States could come with its know-how, state-of-the-art technology, and of course the market access, which we very much need. So it is Uzbekistan-United States partnership in CRM is not only about economic development, but it's also about bringing more trust and in our relations. And we highly appreciate the support of the administration, of Congress. We have good friends on the Hill, good friends in administration who are supporting us in this direction. And we very much appreciate the active involvement of different agencies and departments here, including Exim Bank and including DFC in these efforts. So we see this cooperation is a strategic one. And we're confident that it will bring more economic modernization. It will also bring the connectivity, and it will bring, reliable supply chains. So it's a win-win situation. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Ambassador Pyatt, I want to go to you to bring in the U.S. side of things here. Can you talk about how the U.S. and Central Asian governments can work to ensure that critical mineral development supports both long-term regional stability and economic diversification?
Yep. Thank you, Andrew. Great to be back at the Atlantic Council. A special pleasure to be here with my friend and colleague, Ambassador Ashokbayev and DCM Akhmetov. Central Asia, and especially our cooperation around critical minerals, was a priority for me when I was serving as Assistant Secretary of State for Energy Resources. I always point out my first meeting as Assistant Secretary was with the ambassador, and I think I met on 3 different continents with Minister Sharlapayev as we traveled around the world talking about these issues. That reflects 2 facts. One is, of course, the very high profile for energy issues as part of the U.S. relationship with Central Asia. I'm now Senior Managing Director for Energy and Critical Minerals at McClarty Associates. So I talk to a lot of global energy companies. Of course, we have both Chevron and ExxonMobil as the 2 largest foreign investors in Kazakhstan. Indeed, the Chevron investment in Kazakhstan is quite material for that company, one of its largest exposures in the world. Likewise, in Uzbekistan, the largest American investor in Uzbekistan today is Air Products, and I was proud to be with the then CEO of Air Products and the Uzbek president in 2023. When that agreement was signed, it's proven to be a great success. I was also very proud to be part of President Biden's C5+1 summit meeting with the Central Asian leaders in 2023 at the UN General Assembly. That was a critically important development because it was the first time at that level that we brought all 5 countries together. And we specifically, at the president's level, identified critical minerals cooperation as an issue that our governments collectively would continue to focus on. As DCM Akhmetov pointed out, that initiative has lived on beyond the political transition here in the United States. And indeed, one of the few issues of bipartisanship in Washington today, I think, is the imperative of diversifying critical mineral supply chains. As Senator Daines' comments reflected, Central Asia encapsulates the geopolitical challenges around that. You have China looming as a very large neighbor, Russia with a long legacy of political and economic influence, and the challenges of seeking to extract resources from a landlocked region. That said, what Exxon and Chevron are doing every single day in Kazakhstan demonstrates the viability of that kind of an American partnership. And I think it's important that we continue to project that into the energy transition era and the issues around critical mineral supply chain diversification and the processing of those minerals. I would commend to everybody the recent report issued by the IEA, its annual critical minerals assessment, which looks at how the market for critical minerals is evolving. This was a legacy of the Biden administration, which pushed the agency to focus more systematically on critical minerals as part of their focus on energy security and energy resources. What the big takeaway from that recent report is, first and foremost, the problem's not getting better, it's getting worse in terms of China's domination of these sectors. And in particular, the shortages that the global market is going to begin to experience before 2030 on especially copper and lithium. And of course, Kazakhstan looms particularly large in the copper area. So there is a strong both geopolitical and economic business argument for focusing more systematically on these issues. The rationale for this was laid out in the Bush administration. When Condoleezza Rice created the South and Central Asia Bureau, I was proud to serve as Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of that bureau for 3 years. In fact, when we started the C5+1 process. But I think it's going to take continued work from institutions like the Atlantic Council, working with the Central Asian diplomats we have here today, to continue to highlight the imperative of focusing on these issues. I have been in touch, continue in my new role with our Development Finance Corporation. DFC obviously has a huge role to play in terms of helping to de-risk some of these transactions. I was also very grateful that both the ambassador and DCM alluded to our work together on the Mineral Security Partnership. Both Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan have been active members of the Mineral Security Partnership Forum, which was an initiative we created in order to crowd in financing to deliver the larger volumes of these resources that our energy transition is going to require, but to do so in a way that reduces our dependence on a single country. So finding ways to bring in resources from DFC, from the Exim Bank, from JOGMEC in Japan, from the European Union is what the MSP was set up to do. The last 2 points I would make in this vein. One, the State Department is still, as reflected in the discussions today, going through a major reorganization. I'm glad that one function that has been retained is the technical assistance that my former bureau, the Energy Resources Bureau, has deployed to work with governments around the world to diversify their critical mineral supply chains, and in particular to modernize their geologic surveys and the data they present to markets. These programs have been an active part of our conversation with multiple governments in the region, and I think it's very important that the US government remains engaged in that way. It's a function that only the State Department can perform. The US Geological Survey doesn't have the foreign assistance resource to do that. So I think holding on to that is important as well. And then finally, I would just put a pin in another related issue, which is the uranium supply chain, because the Trump administration has made a very strong commitment to growing the US civil nuclear sector. We're going to need more fuel to power all of these reactors. Kazakhstan is one of the world's largest resource holders for uranium, and figuring out how we can work together with Kazakhstan to eliminate all dependence on Russia and deliver the larger volumes that our systems are going to need.
Thanks very much, Ambassador Pyatt. Joe, I want to go to you on the legal side of things here. What are the key regulatory challenges facing the development and the export of critical minerals in Central Asia? And how can states like Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan work to mitigate these challenges to prevent future international law disputes?
Thanks for this question, Andrew. So regulatory frameworks protect sovereign prerogatives while shaping investor risk. Before committing capital, investors may scrutinize whether core safeguards, including transparency and governance norms, reliable geological data, and regional cooperation, are adequately provided for in the host state. However, two key regulatory considerations, namely anti-corruption and environmental considerations, or regulations, excuse me, are often particularly relevant in international investment disputes. In the interest of time and given the frequency with which these issues arise, I'll focus my comments on those two issues, but there are, of course, a number of other important regulatory issues that states must necessarily keep in mind. Turning to the first point, namely corruption. Corruption presents a material exposure both for states and for investors. Multinational financiers or foreign-owned companies may be subject to specific anti-corruption regulatory regimes. Some of these may even trigger potential extraterritorial criminal exposure. By way of example, investors from the United Kingdom are subject to the Bribery Act, whose jurisdictional reach attaches to any entity with a, quote, close connection to the United Kingdom, irrespective of where the alleged illicit conduct occurs. And then American-linked ventures have traditionally navigated the FCPA, Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. And although a February 2025 order temporarily paused the Department of Justice's enforcement, a pending review may well reinstate its full reach. Now, corruption is also highly relevant to host states, and that's not just because of the well-known manner in which it can impede development, but also because it can provide a successful defense in international investment arbitration when it can be proved. In particular, it's well established that investments procured through corruption are not entitled to protection under investment treaties, and there's a lot of jurisprudence on this. So as a result, states have very frequently raised claims of corruption as defenses, either as a matter of jurisdiction or the merits. Now, such defenses are often unsuccessful simply because corruption can be hard to prove. There's insufficient proof of wrongdoing. And in other cases, investment claims have been dismissed in their entirety on grounds of corruption, so they have been successful in some cases. Uzbekistan has successfully defended 2 cases, 2 investment claims on the basis that bilateral investment treaties cannot provide protection to investors who obtained their investments through corruption. Such issues can also arise under investment disputes under contracts, so it's not just treaty-based claims. By way of example, in World Duty Free versus Kenya, this is a very well-known case in this field, Kenya sought to dismiss the claimant's case on the grounds that the relevant contract had been procured through payment of a bribe to the former president. And the tribunal held that claimant had, in fact, procured the contract through a bribe, and that consequently the claimant had no right to pursue or recover on any of its pleaded claims. So the case was dismissed in its entirety. The second point I wanted to address concerns the environmental regulations. That's, of course, also a growing consideration for both investors and states. Existing treaty law and evolving customary international law may impose obligations on states with impacts for potential investors. So, for example, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan are all signatories to the Paris Agreement and to the Kyoto Protocol, which impose various obligations related to environmental protection. And additionally, recent and pending advisory opinions on climate change may have a significant impact on investment arbitration. So, for example, last year, the International Tribunal on the Law of the Sea issued an advisory opinion interpreting UNCLOS, the UN Convention on the Law of Sea, and determined that anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere constitute, quote, pollution of the marine environment under that treaty. And this means that there's a due diligence obligation to take all necessary measures to prevent, reduce, and control marine pollution from anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions. Now, most Central Asian states are not parties to the UNCLOS, but the International Court of Justice's forthcoming advisory opinion on climate change may interpret similar due diligence standards as binding under customary international law, which means even in the absence of a treaty. So as a result, greenhouse gas emissions that result from mining in Central Asia may have liability implications under international law. And these environmental concerns could provide a basis for states to exercise regulatory powers in a manner that may be unwelcome to existing investors, but that is justified under international law. And it's worth noting in this regard that real or perceived failure to meet acceptable environmental standards can result in civil society protests or project shutdowns, which can lead to claims against host states under international investment law for alleged failure to accord full protection and security. This is, again, quite common. By way of one more example, in Gabriel Resources versus Romania, a Canadian company initiated proceedings against Romania after Romanian courts declared the proposed gold mine illegal due to environmental and social concerns. The claimant argued, among other things, that Romania had failed to accord the investor full protection and security by delaying the endorsement of an environmental permit and allowing Parliament to decide on whether the project should continue, which resulted in protests. So in short, to sum it up, Central Asian states have a strong incentive to retain policy space to implement robust environmental regulations, to ensure community participation, and to align with international commitments on climate change and sustainable development.
Very, very interesting. Thanks for digging into the details there, Joe. Reed, if I can bring you in here. We've talked about the big picture, the strategic imperatives, some of the legal considerations. I wonder if you can help us understand the brass tacks of some of these issues. What are the significant infrastructural, logistical challenges to scaling up extraction and processing of critical minerals in Central Asia?
Thanks, Andrew. And I really appreciate this question, largely because if what we're trying to solve for with this conversation is how do we develop reliable alternatives to Chinese-dominated supply chains in particular, that comes down to a question of project economics for those alternatives. And project economics is going to be fundamentally determined by infrastructure, capital inputs such as energy and water access. Mining and processing is some of the most energy-intensive industrial activities we have in the global economy. And so when we think about the viability of developing resources in Central Asia, those infrastructure considerations need to be front and center. It also is critical to thinking about how we build out the supply chain beyond just the upstream. I think, as has been referenced both by the ambassador and also by Ambassador Pyatt, our supply chain resiliency efforts are going to be moot if we focus purely on upstream development. We've seen this here in the United States, where developing upstream rare earth element deposits doesn't do anything for supply chain resilience if we end up having to send those to China for processing. And so developing a strategy which improves electricity transmission, which improves water access, are key fulcrum issues to establish a reliable, effective, and ultimately competitive midstream that can loosen some of the control or the concentration of these supply chains in China, which is particularly severe in that midstream. The other element I want to touch on is the logistics associated with getting these materials out of the region. As Ambassador Pyatt mentioned, we're talking about a landlocked region. And so we need to be equally as thoughtful about our infrastructure by rail, our transportation infrastructure in ports, continuing to develop and expand the Middle Corridor in particular is one area where we've seen early success that should be built upon, because that ultimately is what affects the cost of bringing that material out of the region and to key centers of demand, which is ultimately what we're trying to solve for. This all returns back to the economic viability of these alternative assets. The other major logistical obstacle as it relates to project development that I'd like to highlight, and this has been mentioned several times, is the urgency of mapping these resources more effectively and renewing our attention to what's in the ground, both in terms of the scale of those deposits and the quality of those deposits. The reality is we're still discovering new material in the region. Kazakhstan just announced a profoundly large rare earth element deposit, right? We won't know what we can do to most effectively deploy capital, where we should be placing our time, if we don't have a precise understanding of what's under the ground. Now, to answer your question fully and talk about where these where these challenges can be resolved and where the United States can play a particular role. Because our critical resource challenges are fundamentally infrastructure challenges, it actually widens the aperture of where the United States can engage most effectively. To what you mentioned earlier, Ambassador Pyatt, Chevron and Exxon are two major companies in the region that are fundamentally tied to energy development and energy growth throughout Central Asia. The United States lacks a mining equivalent of a Chevron or an Exxon. So as a country, we should be leveraging those comparative advantages in the energy space to develop what we know how to develop in order to make these projects successful. So if we think about our critical mineral partnerships as wider energy and infrastructure development partnerships, we actually can bring more compelling packages for partnership to the table that is both going to make the United States a more attractive partner to the region, but also do the hard work that needs to be done to make these projects viable and accessible to the West in the first place. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Reed. All right, so one round of questions down to our panel here. Very, very interesting so far. I have a few more questions, but I wonder if I can first make a deal with our panelists here. We have a little less than 30 minutes here, and like Ambassador Ashokbayev said, we have a whole room full of smart people that came here to ask you all questions. I wonder for round two, can we do 2-minute answers per question, and then we'll get to everyone else here in the room? Perfect. Take silence as agreement. So Ambassador Ashokbayev, it's back to you. Critical minerals development in Kazakhstan will likely in part, kind of as Reed was talking about here, be tied to the development of the Middle Corridor that connects European markets with Kazakhstan and Central Asia across the Caspian and Black Seas. What steps is Kazakhstan taking right now to make the transport of minerals and metals across the Caspian more attractive to would-be investors?
So thank you for this question, and I'll try to be brief and just give you some numbers. For the past 20 years, Kazakhstan invested close to 35 billion in the development of its transit infrastructure. We are planning to construct another 5,000 kilometers of railroads in the coming years up until the year 2030. We are now bringing freight traffic on the middle corridor, which increased 62% last year, reaching 4.5 million tons. So our target now is to double that volume to 10 million tons by 2027. We're expanding our Caspian Sea fleet from 17 to 34 vessels. So in fact, the agenda has been identified by both EBRD and World Bank studies. And World Bank came up with 10 priority actions to address bottlenecks and improve efficiency of the middle corridor. So there is no need to invent the wheel, and those are developing new railway connections between Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, increasing rolling stock availability, particularly locomotives in Georgia, upgrading the port of Aktau, and so on and so forth. And in this regard, let me just point out that Kazakhstan, those investments by Kazakhstan, it's not only for our economy, but it in fact serves as a common good for the entire region. So when you look at map, Central Asia, entire Central Asia is landlocked. I came up with a definition: we are all in the same submarine. So we do share the same challenges. We do share being landlocked. And those investments by Kazakhstan are definitely a way to unlock the Central Asia's potential in critical minerals.
Thanks very much. Mr. Akhmedov, back to you. How does Uzbekistan view its emerging role in the global supply chain for critical minerals, and what steps is it taking to strengthen this position?
Thank you very much. We see this very seriously because it is not only the commodity issue, but also the strategic opportunity to integrate more deeply to the global economy. As you know, Uzbekistan is home to substantial reserves of rare earth materials and priority materials, rare earth elements. But the goal of the government is not only to stop on the extraction, but to become a trusted, highly valued partner in global supply chains. So we are focusing on processing, refining, and responsible production inside the country. This is very important. In March, President of Uzbekistan reviewed plans for developing strategic minerals and increasing production of highly value-added products. Over the next 3 years, we plan to implement 67 projects worth $2.6 billion USD, covering extraction and processing of 28 types of rare materials. So as I said, it is about building infrastructure, it's about modernizing technology, creating industrial capacity, which will add value added inside the country. In this process, of course, we are paying huge attention to global environmental standards, international best practices. We are in close cooperation with the United States and other partners in capacity building issue. So skilled force is very important for Uzbekistan. And also, we are striving to develop the regional collectivity, especially through the middle corridor, to ensure the export routes are reliable for all our partners. So all embassies were instructed to bring technologies, to bring best industry practices, to set up modern labs in the country, training centers. And in today's fast-changing world, Uzbekistan, as we see it, must build a strong foundation to compete in the global rare materials. And in short, we are ready to be part of the solution. We are ready to be close partner of the United States in this direction. And I'm very glad being back in the United States. Be confident that we have a support here. We have a good friends here, like Ambassador Rosenblum, Ambassador Spratland, Clark, Caitlin sitting there, humble, but she has actually one of the builders of the C5+1 cooperation. But I also see a lot of new faces, which brings a lot of enthusiasm to our partnership, and our embassy doors are always open, and we look forward to close cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you both for taking this challenge so seriously. We're moving right along now. Reed, I'm going to skip back to you. Can you talk about Central Asia's strategic importance in the global landscape for critical minerals and how you assess its potential compared to some other emerging regions around the world?
Given the 2-minute time cap for this round.
Yeah, that's right. You're on the clock.
Right.
Yeah.
I think the United States is fundamentally at a point where no resource opportunities can really be taken off the table, first off. We're only seeing the risks of supply chain dependency deepen. We're starting to see some of the what were once almost worst case scenario type export bans emerge from China. And so truly, while we've seen encouraging attention to this from multiple administrations here now, we're at this point in our critical mineral supply chain story where we need to be doing everything everywhere all at once, right? But within that, we need to be very thoughtful and precise about the opportunities that are presented to us. And that's where I think Central Asia plays a pretty profound role for certain key minerals and materials and commodities writ large, right? Copper, lithium, Ambassador Pyatt mentioned uranium and the uranium fuel supply chain, the nuclear fuel supply chain. Rare earth elements being a particularly severe part of vulnerability for the United States. This region has the resources that the United States needs, and that makes it a strategic asset if the United States can embark upon a partnership that is constructive and folds the region into a wider supply chain resilience strategy. But as I mentioned, what's critical to project development here is economies of scale and project economics, and that's where the region also needs to be used as a strategic asset. Economies of scale are necessary for project viability, but partnerships of scale are necessary for supply chain reliability and resilience. And that's where, even though logistically it may be more costly or more difficult to get material out of the region into demand centers in the United States, there are strategic value add to getting that material out of the region to Europe. Because what we need to do is we need to think about our supply chain resilience efforts as bolstering the partnerships and demand centers from Chinese dominance. China operates a closed loop critical minerals supply chain, and that's what allows or affords it the ability to do the market manipulation, which has put us in the position we find ourselves in right now. We can only unlock that or unstick that if we build the coalition of partnerships and demand centers that are capable of detaching themselves or de-risking themselves from China's dominance in the supply chain. And that's where efforts like the Mineral Security Partnership, efforts like the C5+1 are critical diplomatic tools to actually see the strategic gains from the project opportunities that we see in the region.
Super. Ambassador Pyatt, from the U.S. perspective, what kinds of collaboration, technical assistance, financing, joint ventures, you name it, that would be most valuable and realistic, frankly, in supporting this kind of sustainable development of Central Asia's critical materials?
Thanks, Andrew. I'm going to beat your 2-minute goal.
Let's go.
Most importantly, the United States has to show up. I think about the U.S.-Kazakhstan energy security dialogue. Ambassador Rosenblum and I, it took us probably 1.5 years of bureaucratic jungle clearing to reach agreement on reviving that forum, which is so important to how we shape our policy approach. We have to keep that going. If you think about the major pieces of US-supported energy infrastructure in Central Asia, the CPC pipeline, the Southern Gas Corridor, those were the products of literally decades of concerted American diplomacy, led by the State Department, the ENR Bureau and its predecessors, going back to Ambassador Morningstar, that stayed focused on the work that had to be done. We have a new vehicle now with the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, which has a G7 umbrella on top of it. We ought to be looking at what PGI did with the Lobito Corridor in Angola and asking ourselves, what is the Central Asian version of the Lobito Corridor, a specific project that we can mobilize our resources against in order to deliver progress and advance our shared security interests.
Thanks very much. Joe, you get the last question from me. So we just heard from Ambassador Pyatt there talk a little bit about formal investment agreements and other kinds of partnership. What can we learn from the current kind of evolving investment treaty practice about how to attract capital and safeguard that policy space that you talked about earlier?
Thanks, Andrew. I'll also try to keep it as quick as I possibly can. So international foreign investment is typically governed by bilateral investment treaties, multilateral free trade agreements, individual investment contracts, and in some cases, domestic foreign investment laws. Most investment treaties provide for open-ended consent, allowing investors to bring claims under the treaty, under certain conditions, of course, when a dispute arises before an international tribunal. Treaties and contracts typically grant foreign investors certain protections under international law, which may include fair and equitable treatment, protection from uncompensated expropriation, full protection and security, and access to investor-state dispute settlement. These instruments can catalyze capital inflows for rare earth projects. However, they can also carry litigation exposure for states if investment projects or regulations evolve unpredictably. So an exclusive focus on investor rights may inadvertently constrain a country's ability to pursue legitimate public policy objectives, such as environmental protection, sustainable development, or economic diversification. And this balancing act has been the subject of debate in numerous international forums and has catalyzed many states to withdraw, or amend, or renegotiate existing international investment agreements. I'm just going to very briefly mention a few key considerations for states when attempting to balance a state's sovereign right to regulate with investors' interest in safeguarding their assets. So first, states could benefit from including a right to regulate provision in their international agreements and contracts, particularly as it relates to expropriation. Expropriation under international investment arbitration often refers to a situation where a host state takes or substantially interferes with foreign investors' property or other investment, either directly through formal transfer of title or indirectly through measures that effectively deprive the investor of the use, value, or control of the investment. And government intervention, even if driven by legitimate environmental or social aims, can trigger claims if it effectively neutralizes the benefit of the investment, the economic benefits of the investment. So for that reason, there's been a trend in recent years of states issuing interpretive declarations or renegotiating bilateral treaties to clarify the definition of expropriation to account for these sorts of concerns. Uzbekistan is again a good example. It signed a new bilateral investment treaty with India last year, and it clarifies that non-discriminatory measures adopted for public health, environmental protection, or sustainable development do not constitute indirect expropriation. The second thing I want to briefly mention, I hope I'm not violating the new rule, but the second thing I'd like to briefly mention is that states may benefit from bearing their due diligence obligations in mind proactively. So the full protection and security standard that I've mentioned a few times, that standard obligates the host state to exercise due diligence in protecting foreign investors and their investments from physical harm. So this may include harm caused by private parties during civil unrest, instability, or protests. And this often arises in relation to environment-driven opposition, which may escalate into blockades or attacks on mine sites, for example. The last thing I want to mention is essential security interest exceptions, which are sometimes included in contracts or treaties. They're increasingly popular to preserve flexibility during crises without creating carte blanche for regulatory change. So these provisions effectively allow states to take actions that they deem necessary to protect their, quote, essential security interests, even if those actions would otherwise violate their treaty obligations to foreign investors. They typically cover things like war, armed conflict, civil unrest, or other emergencies that threaten the security or public order of the state. So to be clear, all of these efforts do help attract foreign investment. From an investor's vantage point, these refinements don't dilute protection. Rather, they render the legal environment more predictable. And clear boundaries enable more accurate risk pricing, lowering the cost of capital. So in sum, investment treaties are neither investor insurance policies nor barriers to legitimate regulation. They're tools whose effectiveness really depends on careful drafting, good faith implementation, and early attention to environmental, social, and governance realities. And by articulating a transparent regulatory framework and preserving policy space, Central Asian states can position themselves as reliable partners in the critical minerals supply chain while safeguarding sovereign flexibility that is essential for long-term sustainable development. That's all.
All right, time for audience Q&A. So if you have a question in the audience, raise your hand, and my colleagues with microphones behind you will come find you. I'm going to start with one from online while we get set up. First question comes from Jason Sherman. And Ambassador Pyatt, I think you're probably the best placed person for this one. How have we seen U.S. administration priorities shift towards Central Asia between the Biden and Trump administrations? And how does enhanced trade play into the White House's priorities?
So I'm not sure I'm in the best position to speculate on where the new administration is going to land. Obviously, there are a lot of appointments that still haven't been confirmed, so we have to see how policy crystallizes. What I would emphasize is continuity. And that goes to the bipartisan consensus on the critical importance of diversifying our critical mineral supply chains. It's worth remembering that Secretary Rubio was one of the co-sponsors of the Senate's critical minerals bill. The BUILD Act, which I helped work on in the first Trump administration, is going to be one of the key vehicles going forward. I think one of the challenges that Washington's going to have to work through on the DFC side over the summer of 2025 is reauthorization of DFC. And that will be an opportunity for the administration to advance some of its initiatives in terms of the authorities that the DFC will enjoy. The last point I will make, I think one issue that's clearly unresolved in the Trump administration is how are we going to tackle the critical minerals challenge? Are we going to do this through projects domestically in the United States, or are we going to do this through projects that involve international partners? And I would come back to Reed's point. We have to do all of the above. It will be great if we can advance big projects like Resolution Copper, but the fact of life is we cannot fulfill the energy mineral requirements that the U.S. has alone, not to mention global requirements, working only here at home. So that's why initiatives like the Mineral Security Partnership are so important. That's why I welcome the fact that the Korean government, which is now MSP chair, has been so vocal about keeping that initiative moving forward.
Yeah. Everything, everywhere, all at once, right, Reed? All right, let's go to some audience questions. We'll take the gentleman right here. Please stand up and identify yourself.
Hi, my name is Nurul Rekenbek. I'm with Center for Global Civic and Political Strategies. So my question is to Ambassador Ashokbaev. I try to incorporate important points into this question. And first one is, can you share information on how the situation is with investors on Caspian Shelf is developing right now? We know a number of countries have expressed their concern about the situation, arbitration process and whatnot. And why did Kazakhstan decide not to comply with the oil production plan under the OPEC Plus agreement?
Thanks, Nurul.
And the last point would be like, does the country leadership have a plan in case US Congress passes a law limiting Russian ability to continue the war in Ukraine?
Thanks, Nurul. A lot there, Ambassador Ashokbaev.
Well, number of questions packed up. Let me put it this way. The overall answer to the generic answer, I understand that you would love to hear some open, transparent answers, right? But there is ongoing issues with the investor community, as in any case. But what Kazakhstan is known for is a very friendly investor environment and the ability to find resolutions to those issues. With regard to OPEC+, we've numerously stated our position officially, and it boils down to one simple issue, one simple principle, I would say, that as any government, as any authority, we are not going to run against our own interests. And your third question was with regard to sanctions. Well, with regard to sanctions, it's always, Kazakhstan has a proven track record of being quite sanctions compliant jurisdiction, and we've demonstrated that. When sanctions imposing authorities implement or adopt those measures, they should basically think of not only the domestic interests, but also the interests of partner countries and the investor community in the affected jurisdictions. So as in any issue, there should be a balance of interests.
Thank you. All right, let's take two more from the audience here. Let's go the gentleman in the blue suit over there, and then we'll take one more from over here as well. We'll group them together. Give me 1 sec, Aaron. We'll queue up one from the gentleman over here. Please ask one question.
Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you very much. This question is mostly for Ambassador Ashokbayev and Mr. Akhmedov. An increasing critical minerals industry in Central Asia requires greater numbers of specialists, geologists, mining engineers. Are Central Asian universities producing enough graduates in these areas currently, and how can American universities help? Thank you very much.
All right, hold that thought. We'll take the second question from over here for Mr. Kamran in the purple there.
Kamran Bukhari, New Lines Institute for Strategy and Policy. Question primarily for Ambassador Ashokbayev and DCM Akhmedov, but others can answer as well. We have the Trump administration dealing with Russia in a certain way in the context of the Ukraine conflict, and we have a parallel negotiation going on with China. How do these two dynamics impact the critical mineral dynamic and what we're trying to achieve between Washington and both your countries and, of course, the broader region? Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we have universities first, Russia, China second. Mr. Akhmedov, do you want to maybe take the first question?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much for your question. It is a very important question. I mentioned that this capacity building is one of the key directions of our current cooperation with the United States and other Western countries, EU, Great Britain. We are in close cooperation with Japan, Korea, and other countries. There is a geological university in Uzbekistan that is one of the key institutions to provide the specialists for this industry, but still it's not enough. That's why the embassy team, upon the order from the government, is actively working to open the branches of the different leading United States universities. The last one was the Arizona State, opened in Tashkent. We have Webster. We have a number of European universities, including Turin Polytechnical University, that is actively providing the specialists. So yes, this work in this direction is continuing, and of course we will be in close contact with the USGS, State Department, and other institutions here in the administration for the expert support of our efforts. Thank you.
Who wants to take Russia, China? Could be anyone on the panel.
Well, those questions are inevitable, right? So if my colleagues opts to answer the first question, let me add simply, I've mentioned about our work. Both University of Arizona and Arizona State University are brought to the region by Kazakhstan. They are from the great state of Arizona, who is a partner state within state partnership program. So, and we are working, University of Arizona was initially set up on the basis of School of Mining and Mineral Resources, SMMR, which is been something like 150 years ago, but the name is still relevant. That's the beauty. And we are, as I said, we are a mining nation, basically, and we do have a set of polytechnical, as we call them, mining schools in the country. But the idea with those new initiatives, we already started, and those are functioning universities, 37 different universities, international universities are present in Kazakhstan. 95% of those universities are focusing on STEM, including geological studies. But we are now working to set up a new mining school, and this is part of our holistic approach to the development of the mining partnership in mining sector with the leading partners, so that the investor community is comfortable with the workforce. With regard to Russia, China, well, in fact, what is important here in expert community of the US is to recognize the agency of those independent states that we represent here, and recognize, and this is especially true for decision makers, and I am so enthusiastic for the leadership of Senator Daines, who witnessed it firsthand, who engages on a regular basis. I mentioned how highly I appreciate, Andrew, your visit to Astana International Forum. The goal is to understand and embrace realities on the ground. And there is nothing wrong with, for Central Asian countries, and for Kazakhstan specifically, to have constructive, trusted, predictable relations with its neighbors. There is nothing wrong in that space. So when we join Mineral Security Partnership, when we join C5+1 Critical Minerals Dialogue, when we initiate those platforms, we are not stemming from the understanding that we need to somehow lower the level of partnership with our neighboring countries. No, we would like to have the more the better, that's, or the bigger the better, that's probably American motto, right? And the more partnership we have, the better for our own development. And this is, you may view it as a diversification. We are looking at it as a way of balancing, of multiplying our options, and finding synergies in those partnerships. That's the whole idea.
Super, and I think that's actually a great preview for panel number 2. You know, talking about the agency of the Central Asian states. So we're going to talk about U.S. policy to a more dynamic region coming up after the coffee break. That's all the time we have for panel number 1. I want to thank all our panelists, Mr. Alisher Akhmetov, Ambassador Ashikbayev, Reed, Joe, Ambassador Pyatt. Thank you all for being here. Thank you. We're going to go to a coffee break, and we'll come back here at 11:30. Thank you all.
U.S. Central Asia Forum. Our panel today is called U.S. Policy Toward a More Dynamic Central Asia. And I look forward to discussing that with our distinguished panel, and I'll get to the panel in a minute. First, I just want to share with you a short story. In late October of 2015, I was sitting in a restaurant at a hotel in Bishkek, having lunch with one of my colleagues from the U.S. Embassy. I was there accompanying Secretary of State John Kerry, who was on his first leg in Bishkek of a 5-country visit to Central Asia, a historic visit, the first time a U.S. Secretary of State had ever visited all 5 countries in one tour, in one trip. It was also about to be the first meeting of the C5+1, this new diplomatic forum that we were just creating. And while I'm sitting at this lunch, my cell phone rings, and it's the Foreign Minister of Tajikistan, Sirojuddin Aslov, then now Sirojuddin Mukhriddin, he's still the foreign minister, asking me if I could help intervene at a senior level with the Uzbek government about a little problem he was having. It turns out that Foreign Minister Aslov wanted to drive to Samarkand, where the meeting was happening, this C5+1 meeting, and wanted to get there the shortest way possible, which was through the Panjikent border crossing, due west from Dushanbe, maybe a 4 or 5 hour trip. Instead of going through the only open border crossing at the time, which was in Khojand in the north, which would require about a 12-hour trip, including a trip over the mountains, over the Pamir Mountains in late fall, maybe a dangerous proposition. So I immediately called Foreign Minister Kamilov of Uzbekistan, who I had already had a working relationship with, and asked him, put this to him. And he said, well, I hope we can do this, but I better check. A few minutes later, I get the call back, no. It was a firm no. We are not going to open this border crossing at Panjikent, which, by the way, had been closed for the previous 5 years. Now, today, at the time when I told people this story, they weren't surprised. It made perfect sense that Uzbekistan was not going to allow this. Even the foreign minister of Tajikistan, going for a very important meeting with his colleagues in the region and with the U.S. Secretary of State to cross the border. Today, such a scenario, such an event would be almost unimaginable. And that shows you how dynamic the region and how much has changed just in the last decade. So today, we are going to discuss here at the Atlantic Council the question of how that dynamism of the region, how the fast changes in this young and fast developing region might go in coming years. And I'm joined for that discussion by, as I said, a distinguished panel of very well-informed experts to talk about how that dynamism might manifest itself, and specifically what role the U.S. and its foreign policy might play in that process. So let me just quickly introduce our panel today. We have with us Dr. James Carafano, Senior Counselor to the President, and E.W. Richardson Fellow at the Heritage Foundation. We have Ambassador Tatiana Gefeller, who's with us virtually from, I guess, Miami today. Really glad you could join us, Ambassador Gefeller. We have Lisa Curtis, Senior Fellow and Director for Indo-Pacific Security Program at the Center for a New American Security. And Miras Zhienbaev, Advisor to the Chairman of the Board for International Affairs at the Maksut Narakbayev University in Astana. I should add that maybe this is a conflict of interest, but Miras's university hosted some courses that my wife taught when I was living in Astana last year. So we have warm feelings about Maksut Narakbayev University. So let's get right into the discussion. And the way I'm going to approach this, that we're going to approach it, is I've had a few questions which the panelists have had a chance to review ahead of time. I'm going to pose each question to one of the panelists to be sort of the primary respondent, but I then invite the other panelists, and this is optional, you don't have to do it, to react or respond to that initial response. My first question will be directed to Dr. Carafano. And this is about the ways in which the current administration, the Trump administration's foreign policy priorities and approaches, are likely to affect relations with the Central Asian states. Will the changes in foreign policy being implemented by the administration make it easier or harder to deepen those relationships with the Central Asian countries? And the answer that he gives or that others can give can touch on a wide range of issues. There are geopolitical considerations, obviously. There's economic considerations. There may be resource considerations in terms of the resources the U.S. government can bring to bear. So with that, over to you.
Easier.
Jim.
Okay, thanks for having me. See you guys. No, first of all, this is awesome. This is the most people in Washington I've ever seen show up for an event on Central Asia. So this is super cool. So Central Asia has arrived. Congratulations. So just a couple of those. First of all, we should not be like really shocked and surprised that there hasn't been a ton of initiatives and discussion that we've heard from the administration on Central Asia. Frankly, it's a little overwhelming about the number of hotspots that they've jumped into and the number of foreign policy initiatives they had. And it's actually, in my mind, it's a good news story because nothing is burning to the ground, and therefore it doesn't require the president to jump in as he feels he needs to do in many places. So I don't think we should take this as a signal of disinterest or not an intention to deeply engage in the region. I think that absolutely is coming. The second thing is I actually think that engagement with Central Asia fits like a glove with what we will see from the Trump administration. Look, the notion that that we're going to break into some kind of Cold War II, into hard spheres, that's just not going to happen. No power in the world today, certainly not the United States, not China, certainly not Iran or Russia, has the capacity to really develop and hold a hard sphere of influence. So we're not going to go back to the Cold War. We're not going to have imperial empires like Russia or the British Empire. And I think by now we've seen enough of the Trump administration to realize that this is obviously not an isolationist government. It is not something that is just going to confine itself to the Western Hemisphere and disengage from world affairs. So what's the path in the middle? And I think we've already seen that Trump recognizes this, which is the more free and open spaces that are opened up and connected, the more, in addition to kind of solving the hotspots like the wars, that lowers the temperature in terms of global conflict and prosperity. And so, I mean, this was an idea that he really was greatly enamored with when Prime Minister Abe first introduced the idea of free and open Indo-Pacific. And we can clearly see that this is something that that this administration would actually like to see proliferate. And so we have a number of initiatives ongoing, the Three Seas Initiative, IMEC Corridor, the Middle Corridor fits right into that. So I do actually think it's a good fit for this administration. And their approach also is to be, deeply pragmatic. We want to engage in areas where there's something in it for us and then something in it for them. And so certainly there are a lot of opportunities in Central Asia, whether you're talking about mining or energy or other opportunities, that where you could see obvious answers for kind of a win-win. So the last thing I'll say is kind of, and again, I'm just kind of not part of the government, I don't talk to people in the government every day, but one is I think what to expect is to see this administration look at the region as a package, and really think of Central Asia and the South Caucasus and the Black Sea as a community of interest in how they engage, and not really parse them into different parts. Having said that, I think you'll have them look at Iran as a separate piece, and Afghanistan and Pakistan is kind of separate from this. And so in terms of their worldview, how they think they connect, I think we'll see that. So I think you'll hardly ever see the administration talk about engagement in Central Asia and not include, at least in their thinking, that conversation, how does that link with the development in the South Caucasus? How does that link to what we're seeing in the Black Sea? So that's what I would expect. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. That sets us up for, I'm sure, some vigorous back and forth here because there are a lot of specific aspects of our relationship that others may want to comment on. So let me open it up to our other panelists and ask if anyone, again, going back to the three things I mentioned before, but doesn't have to be limited to those, the geopolitics of our relationships. That is, and this came up in the first panel too, will a changing U.S. relationship with either Russia or China bear in any way on relations with Central Asia? Secondly, the economic interests, which Jim also referred to, regarding critical minerals, other resources, other economic interests the U.S. have, will that affect or be changed in a way that affects our relationships for good or bad? And thirdly, the issue of our own resources as a government, what we can bring to bear diplomatically, foreign assistance, and other kinds of engagement. So again, any of the three of you, please jump in.
Well, I was just going to note, I agree with everything that Jim said. I think he's right that these are early days for the Trump administration, and we haven't heard a lot about Central Asia yet. But that doesn't mean that it won't become more an area of focus. And I would say when I was in the first Trump administration at the National Security Council, that Central Asia got a fair bit of attention. In 2018, former President of Kazakhstan, Nazarbayev, visited the White House. 5 months later, the current President of Uzbekistan, Mirziyoyev, visited. We had a Central Asia strategy that was released to the public in early 2020. So there was a actual strategy of how to approach the region. So I think that Jim is right that there could be more focus, and I think the China angle is going to dictate that at least the Trump administration won't be able to ignore Central Asia, because China is certainly making more inroads in the region, mostly economic, but also political, maybe a bit of security. So I don't think it will be a region that the Trump administration, the second Trump administration, can ignore.
Anyone, Tatjana, please. Oh, I think you're maybe muted. Can we unmute Ambassador Gefeller?
Oh, am I on mute?
Yes, you're good. You're good.
I'm good. I just wanted to jump in on the China angle. I think so much will depend on the evolution between the United States and China overall. Right now, a lot of people, certainly in DC and elsewhere, are talking about China as the main adversary to the United States. If that is diffused in the next few months, years, then I think Central Asia can play a very vital role, as it has historically, as a communication corridor between China and the West. It can revert to a very beneficial situation for itself and for its neighbors. On the other hand, if the Trump administration really doubles down and sees China as the adversary par excellence, then still Central Asia will play a role, but it will play a role as sort of a denial of access role. And in that case, all of the initiatives, which Jim cited, of trying to use Central Asia as a beneficial corridor, may actually be not seen as very good by the Trump administration. So I think really everything hangs in the balance, or at least very much hangs in the balance, with where does the U.S.-China relationship go from here.
Can I just?
Yeah, please.
Those are great comments. So I don't think that the U.S. will look at China's role in Central Asia as a main part of the competition between the U.S. and China. It's more of the U.S. looking to open Central Asia up to the West as opposed to blocking China out. But on the other hand, there are strategic resources that the West would like access to, which creates more resilience in the West in terms of supply chains and resource. So I don't think it's necessarily an either or. And I think the reality of this region, I think we all know it is, your neighbors are China on one side, Russia on the other, and Iran on the other. And so if you walk into the region and say, well, you can't do business with any of those people, you can only do business with us, you're never going to be successful. That's just not going to happen, right? So I don't ever see a moment where the United States is cheerleading for a middle corridor that's about China linking to the West. I think they're thinking more of a middle corridor that's linking Central Asia to the West. I don't ever see the U.S. being a cheerleader for building north-south corridors. I don't think they necessarily expect that people will just stop trading with people they've been trading with for centuries. But I mean, I think the U.S. is primarily looking at an investment in the middle corridor and linking that to the West. So, that I think really is this pragmatic element of what we've seen in their relationships, is they can't expect neighbors to ignore their neighbors. I think, and if you don't accept that reality in Central Asia and the South Caucasus, you're never going to get anywhere.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with your point, Jim. It's always been, I think, a basic tenet of our relations with the region to accept the fact that they have to maintain not only friendly but productive relations with their neighbors. That's just the reality for them, and that has to be factored in to all of our interactions. Did you want to add anything on this point, Miras?
Yeah, just a small story, because you started a panel from a very private story. It was more than 20 years ago. I was watching Kazakh TV, and they told something about Jackson-Waning amendments against Kazakhstan, that finally Congress is going to deal with that. It was much prior when I chose my major to be a specialist in Kazakh foreign policy, but we still have a Jackson-Waning. So to really unlock economic potential of Kazakhstan and Central Asia in general, to create a fair, just space, or free and open space, if you wish, there is one act which costs nothing, is to repeal the Soviet-era Jackson-Waning amendments and grant PNTR to Kazakhstan, which is cost zero. And it will be a very powerful first step, demonstrating a very serious position of the US to work with a region which is extremely new as of now.
Well, I think what you're advocating for is maybe a little more dynamism in U.S. policy, as opposed to, we were talking about dynamism in Central Asia because, yeah, we've been saddled with Jackson-Vanik for Kazakhstan for decades. And it is, I think everyone in this room undoubtedly agrees, probably, that it's time for it to go. And it's good to know that we have Senator Daines, who spoke at the beginning as a strong supporter of that. All right, so let me just sort of hone in on one aspect of the U.S. relationship with the region, which in the past many people have focused on. Lisa referred to it earlier, talking about the meetings with President Nazarbayev and President Mirziyoyev in the Oval Office during the first Trump administration, and that is high-level engagement between the two countries. The fact is that in many respects, the United States can't compete on an even footing, if we wanted to compete, with Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan and the rest of Central Asia with their neighbors. President Putin has multiple phone calls a year with all the presidents of Central Asia, multiple visits to the region, and of course their region's visits to Moscow. So the question that has been raised repeatedly over time is, can the US at least do more to show that high-level engagement? So I'm going to pose this question first to Ambassador Gefeller to start, but again, others should jump in. And that is, do you have reason to think that that senior level engagement will be achieved, will be intensified in the current administration?
I hate to sound a pessimistic note, but I'm afraid not. I'm afraid that this administration, as has been said, is transactional. And it will look at Central Asia and ask, so what can you do for me? Speaking on a personal note, when I was ambassador in Kyrgyzstan, I was told in no uncertain terms, your job is to keep Manas Air Base open. 98% of our men and women going in and out of Afghanistan were transiting through Manas, including my own active duty Army son. And so it was very clear at that time what we needed from Kyrgyzstan. Of course, other Central Asian states also hosted bases such as Uzbekistan. And so there was a quid pro quo. And it was a time of much more sort of a globalist approach to the world itself. So on top of wanting Manas Air Base, we also wanted to spread human rights, respect for the rule of law, respect for democracy. There was a lot of reason to engage with Kyrgyzstan in particular and Central Asia in general. Now, again, it's very early days, of course, of the Trump administration. But as I ask myself, what can Central Asia give in return for high-level engagement by this administration? Well, I hate to repeat myself, but access or denial of access to China to a certain degree, of course, the mineral resources to a certain degree, but because you don't choose your neighborhood, to a certain degree, independence from Russia. And to a certain degree, I think friendship with Turkey, which after all is still a NATO ally, even though sometimes a very independent, shall we say, NATO ally. So unless some of these issues really rise to the forefront and President Trump sees that there is a specific actual reason to engage with a particular country, for example, then I think absolutely he will go for it. But I don't see that general sort of global interest of planting a flag all over the world that I've seen in past administrations.
Can I offer? I have a different take on that, Ambassador. What's most notable about this administration is it's a very cabinet-run government, and cabinet officials have an enormous amount of authority and have really been pushed out publicly, and that I think is different and noteworthy and really important. So while the prospects of Donald Trump doing a Central Asian tour may not be high, the possibility of cabinet officials being deployed, I actually think is pretty high. And what we've seen is the cabinet officials have already been used in a variety of places in a variety of interesting things. We saw the Secretary of Homeland Security, for example, in the Middle East, which is kind of unusual. We just carpet bombed Alaska, which I know is part of the United States. I get that, but we hardly ever pay much attention there, and we just carpet bombed them with cabinet officials. So I could see definitely the Secretary of Energy, Secretary of Interior, Secretary of Homeland Security, because there's a lot of issues about borders and stuff. All people who are deeply influential in the administration, the kind of people that might be deployed to the region and would actually have very productive and I think influential conversations.
Others, Miraz, what's the perspective from sitting in Central Asia as you do most of the time, about this issue of high-level engagement and where the U.S. fits into that? And do you see there being a prospect for that to change?
Well, high-level visits are always a political act, demonstrating the strong ability of the country, strong willingness to work with the region, to engage with the region more. We never had a US president, for example, to be in Kazakhstan, to be in Astana. At MNU, we hosted several world leaders, and the moment when they engage with the youth is the most important part of the visit, because they encourage the youth to think about this part of the world, which is quite far from the region. The uniqueness of this moment now for the modern Central Asia and for a very young generation of Central Asians, that average age for the region is 29, so up to 30. The world is open for Central Asia, and Central Asia is open for the world. We don't have to always waiting for the US to make our American dream came true. We can, we can study in Singapore, we can study in Europe, having brilliant relations with Japan or Korea. We already have 13 formats of C5+1 formats, as example. This year we're expecting to have C5 plus US, actually, because it's happening once in 2 years. So we look forward to see what this new President Trump administration going to show us, because I believe it is important part of our bilateral and regional track, both within the US and Central Asia, to have high-level visits. Clearly and understandable, it should not be annual or something like that, but to break an ice, to break a status quo, to start this conversation and to engage more and demonstrate a political will.
Yeah. Did you want to add on this?
Well, you recall it was former President Biden who met with the 5 Central Asian leaders in 2023 on the fringes of the UN General Assembly. I don't think there's anything that says President Trump can't do something similar. We tried to arrange that in the first Trump administration. It never happened, just with schedules, and people are very busy, even at the UN General Assembly. But that's possible. I think Jim is right. I don't think we can expect President Trump to go to Central Asia. But there are other opportunities.
It would be a first ever.
Yes, it would be. But we probably shouldn't hold our breaths.
Yeah. No, and I can attest that as a diplomat who's worked in the region, those high-level engagements have huge knock-on effects in terms of our access, our visibility in the country. And the New York meeting with President Biden and the 5 presidents in New York in 2023, we were feasting off of that for months afterwards in our relations. So I think it does have a big impact. But I recognize the realities of whether that might happen. And now I want to turn to something, and I think Ambassador Gefeller mentioned this in her response, about this issue of transactionalism, or the transactional approach to foreign policy. Now, that can be defined in a number of ways, and I think people are trying to define what that means with respect to the Trump administration's approach to foreign policy. But my question here is, assuming that there is a more transactional, in quotation marks, approach in the offing over the next 3.5 years, what does that mean for Central Asia itself, for the countries in the region? How will they react? How will they take advantage or not be able to take advantage? Again, the definition of transactional, it's up to you to decide what you think it means and will mean for the Trump administration. But I'm curious what you all think. And I'm going to direct that question first to Lisa and let her comment.
Well, I'll just say that transactional engagement is better than no engagement. So, I think, we probably will see a more transactional approach, but that won't be entirely bad. That's not an entirely bad thing. I do have issues with the fact that I think there's going to be less of a focus on, democracy, human rights, and those issues, and I'll get to that in a second. But first, I would say that I think the terrorism issue is going to be important for this administration. The ISIS-K connections to Central Asia, which we're seeing more and more, really primarily Tajikistan. We're seeing more and more Tajikistan citizens showing up in ISIS-K attacks, particularly the attack on Crocus Hall in Moscow last year, but there's also been some Tajikistan nationals picked up here in the United States as well as in other parts of Europe. So I think the terrorism issue will be important, and you'll see engagement by this administration. Much of it will probably be quiet in terms of intelligence, information sharing, maybe some training. So it probably won't be touted publicly, but it will be important. And I think the Central Asian countries would welcome it as well. But let me say a few words about the downsides of transactionalism, or sort of letting go of the U.S. traditional focus on democracy and human rights and religious freedom. Religious freedom was important to the first Trump administration. I don't know if it will continue to be important in this administration, but I think with the foreign aid cuts, I don't know the numbers for Central Asia, but I'm assuming that much of the foreign assistance that was going to Central Asia has probably been cut. We don't know if it's going to be restored. But I think there will be cost to this. And here I'll point to a report that CNAS recently put out. It's about South Asia, but I think it also applies to Central Asia. It's called Democracy in South Asia Amid U.S. Aid Cuts: What's at Stake for Great Power Competition? And in it, we argue that by reducing support for democracy promotion, media freedom, transparent economic development, that what we're going to see is China will fill the vacuum. And when we talk about competition with China, it's not just economic and military, it's also ideological. And so, the way the U.S. provides foreign assistance, it provides it in a way that fosters open societies and respect for human rights and respect for people in general. We know that's not the way China does its assistance programs, particularly with its Belt and Road Initiative, and that it often corrupts leaders and destroys public confidence in their governing systems. So I think that is going to be a cost of reducing our foreign assistance, including in Central Asia. And I would say that, the United States has a great opportunity to engage more in Central Asia. The Central Asians want the U.S. there. The U.S. has traditionally supported the sovereignty and independence of the Central Asian nations. With Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the increasing Chinese footprint, I think Central Asians are looking for alternatives, and the U.S. can be seen as one of those alternatives. The U.S. is never going to have the same kind of footprint as Russia and probably not even China, but we should be there. We should be an option. We should be an alternative for the Central Asians. And then the last point I want to make is, again, coming back to what are we going to lose with a transactional approach that does not continue to hold up our principles of focusing on democracy and human rights. And here I'm going to speak with my hat. I'm chairman of the board of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, which the Trump administration is trying to defund. We are a congressionally funded 75-year-old organization that provides access to uncensored, fact-based reporting in areas where free press can be stifled. RFE is the only international broadcaster producing content in all 5 of the languages of Central Asia, of course, also in Russian. So it's important, and it's providing information that is seeking to blunt the influence of radical Islamist movements. It's done a lot of in-depth reporting on the terrorism, extremism issues, as well as a whole host of issues in the region. So I think that I believe RFE will survive. But if we didn't, I think the U.S. would be losing a valuable tool that is encouraging open and free societies, and it's, again, a way to compete with Russian and Chinese disinformation, misinformation, propaganda that we know is going into this region. And in essence, it's simple. We would lose U.S. influence. This is a way that we continue to maintain influence and our values. We can talk about our values and what we want to see, the kinds of governing systems that we would like to see and that help maintain peace and prosperity in the region.
Thanks, Lisa.
Could I jump in here for a second?
Go ahead, Tatiana.
Since I brought up the term transactional,
yes.
It's not necessarily a pejorative. Another way of saying it would be realistic. And I would like to share that recently I met with a high-level Central Asian official who told me that he welcomed what he thought would be a more transactional approach from the Trump administration. He said that during the Biden administration, we were lectured to about climate change, about human rights, et cetera, and it was just lecturing and never was anything concrete done to benefit our country. I've heard this actually over and over Central Asia from governments. Even Kyrgyzstan, the so-called island of democracy, now is turning, unfortunately, more authoritarian. And I would suggest that the governments of Central Asia will welcome a more transactional approach, fewer lectures on climate change, human rights, et cetera. Now, the peoples of Central Asia, I would say it's a different story. And to Lisa's point, a de-emphasis of human rights, et cetera, may not be as welcome for at least some of the populations of Central Asia. But I think with the governments, things will go actually more smoothly if it's a realistic approach.
Thanks.